Imagine this. It's March 13th, 1997. A clear, cloudless night over the Arizona desert. Families are out in their backyards. Children point at the stars. The air is calm, then without warning, 5 brilliant orbs appear over the Estrella Mountains. Perfectly aligned, completely silent. Not meteors, not flares, something else. They drift slowly toward Phoenix, glowing, pulsing, alive. Air traffic controllers at Sky Harbor International lean forward, scanning radar. Nothing. The skies are empty. But the city below is staring upward in disbelief. Reports flood in. A pilot near Henderson calls the tower. I have 5 lights, moving as one. That's not aircraft. Another call from Prescott. Then Glendale, then Tucson. Thousands of witnesses all describing the same thing. A vast V-shaped craft, black against the stars, big enough to block the night sky. The governor is notified. Military bases go silent, and somewhere in the desert people stand frozen, listening to the impossible quiet as the formation passes overhead. Minutes later, it's gone. No explosion, no crash, just darkness, and questions that have never been answered. What really happened that night? A secret test flight? An illusion shared by thousands? Or something not of this world? This is the story of the unexplained Phoenix Lights. Stay with me. On the night of March 13th, 1997, in the fading light over Arizona's high desert, something extraordinary unfolded, and what thousands saw that evening would spark debate, controversy, and wonder for decades. As the sun slipped below the horizon, the sky was unusually clear. Families glanced upward, commuters slowed, and in small towns and cities alike, eyes turned skyward. At around 7:55 p.m. MST near Henderson, Nevada, one man and his family witnessed a formation of lights in a perfect V-shape, moving silently toward Arizona. The lead light glowed white. The rest burned with a steady orange hue. The object, in the witness's memory, was as large as a Boeing 747 moving without sound. NASA reports and public records reference this early sighting. A little later, in Paulden, Arizona, a former police officer, steady, trained in observation, pulled his car to a stop along a dark highway. He watched 5 lights gliding overhead, strung out like lights on a wire, he later said, until they disappeared into the southern sky. At that moment, the opacity of the night seemed broken. A haunting geometry carved across the heavens. Across Prescott and Dewey, other witnesses observed the lights shift from arc to V, then coalesce. John Kaiser and his family in Prescott Valley used binoculars. They saw what looked like a triangular formation. One of the red lights at the nose of the triangle glowed with a faint white core. The cluster banked to the right, then drifted southeast until vanishing behind the horizon, leaving witnesses breathless and silenced. In Phoenix itself, the second phase began around 10 p.m. To residents, the lights were stationary, hovering in perfect lines over the city. The Turnage family, Tim, Bobby, Hal, and grandson Damien, stood in their yard as distant dots appeared. Slowly, the lights drew closer. The space between them opened. The cluster took the form of a 60-degree carpenter's square with 5 lights embedded. 1 at the tip, 2 along each wing. No noise broke the silence. One moment, stars shone through the gaps. The next, the void between lights swallowed stars behind it. And then, one red oval lifted and winked out. Ross Nickel, driving on Highway 89 at 8:10 p.m., told how what first looked like dim stars shyly revealed their true nature. They shifted from white to red as they crept overhead. He judged them at perhaps 1,000 feet altitude. In Ross's recollection, there was absolutely no sound. From start to finish, total silence. This account is preserved in the Unsolved Mysteries archive. Later that night, a commercial airline pilot and his wife, returning from dinner, marveled at the line of lights. He had flown for 29 years, jets, airliners, small craft. But this defied classification. He tried to rationalize, could they be landing lights? But they were too slow, too uniform, too silent. And most puzzling, the lights pointed straight down, not forward. Meanwhile, amateur videographers like Michael Christen in Phoenix captured the spectacle on camcorders. He stood by his car, calling his wife in wonder. an entire display of lights comes on. It was really quite unusual. His footage would later be core evidence in the event's public narrative. Kristen's video frames are archived at US UFO recording centers. As the procession stretched over 300 miles, from the Nevada border through Phoenix, toward Tucson, witnesses in Glendale, Scottsdale, and Paradise Valley also reported lights draped overhead, then descending behind desert ridges. Amateur astronomer Mitch Stanley in Scottsdale peered through his telescope. The 3 lead lights fit in his field of view, each splitting under magnification into 2-point sources fixed beneath square wings. He tried to tell his mother, but by dawn media rumors had eclipsed his measured report. The Phoenix New Times later contrasted his view with city council responses. Then came the explanations. The US Air Force and the Maryland Air National Guard would later claim, years of polished statements, that the lights were A-10 aircraft-dropping illumination flares over the Barry-Goldwater Range, part of Operation Snowbird. But the official timeline placed flare drops between 9 and 10 p.m., after the principal sightings had already etched themselves into hundreds of minds. Critics note, the early bird reports, the silence, the dimensional precision, flares, can drift, flicker, fade, but they don't hover, shift formation, bank, and vanish with such orchestration. Governor Fife Symington, in office that night, publicly jeered the UFO theories. In a later press event, he even had an aide don an alien costume to diffuse the hysteria. But over time, the governor reversed course. In 2007, he confessed seeing the lights himself. He told interviewers, "It was enormous and inexplicable. It had geometric precision. No known aircraft fits that description." He demanded greater transparency and urged new investigations. Symington's shift is documented in Arizona state interviews and public records. To this day, radar logs have not publicly confirmed a craft of that scale. No agency has acknowledged classification of a silent, low-altitude vehicle of this magnitude. Yet the witnesses remain numerous, consistent, haunted. The Phoenix Lights stand in the annals of UFO lore not merely as an event, but as a living puzzle. The evening of March 13th did not end for many. Over coffee the next morning, witnesses compared notes. Some doubted their own senses. Some stared at old video frames again, zooming, freezing, scratching at pixels. Debate raged. Dual phenomena. That night, one unknown craft followed by flares, misidentification, government cover-up. For some, that night shattered certainty. Because when thousands peer skyward, see geometry in motion, feel something impossible. That's more than a fleeting hallucination. It confronts assumptions. That is what Keynote 1 truly means. The mass convergence of trained and untrained witnesses. The stretch across miles, the refusal of conventional explanations to fully satisfy. The Phoenix Lights were not a moment. They were a rupture in the visible sky, a collective gasp in silence. 1,000 feet might have been the height of Hermichin's flight, but for the witnesses of March 13, 1997, the Arizona desert seemed boundless, a vast stage for a spectacle that would unfold without precedent. The early evening air was crisp, dry, and clear. The horizon stretched in a faint haze of desert dust and city lights. At 7:55 p.m. MST, somewhere near Henderson, Nevada, a man slowed his car along the shoulder, binoculars pressed to his eyes. Ahead of him, a formation of lights glided silently, perfectly spaced, moving with a steadiness that seemed impossible for any conventional aircraft. The lead light glowed white, and the trailing lights burned orange, each set equidistant from the next, forming a V that cut across the sky. He squinted, trying to reconcile this with every flight manual he had studied, every radar chart memorized. Nothing fit. Moments later, in Polden, Arizona, a retired police officer, seasoned in observation and accustomed to tracking the unexpected on the streets, brought his vehicle to a stop. 5 lights, he would later report, moved overhead. Like lights strung on a wire, silent, deliberate, unmoving in formation, as if choreographed. He could make out no wings, no fuselage, only the geometric perfection of the display. He transmitted a brief factual description to a colleague, his voice calm, betraying none of the astonishment he felt, as the lights drifted southward. Behind him, the desert stretched dark and still, and yet above an uncanny symmetry unfolded impossible to ignore. Further south in Prescott Valley, John Kaiser and his family observed the lights expand into a massive triangular formation. The lead light appeared to float slightly ahead of the rest, a steady beacon in the growing night. Through binoculars, John discerned subtle shifts in intensity. The lights pulsed faintly, like the breathing of a living organism. Around them, the sky seemed to darken, as if the void between the lights swallowed the stars. They could not hear any engines, any hum of rotor or jet, any warning signal. The phenomenon moved at a pace too controlled for meteors, too silent for conventional aircraft. In Phoenix, the main spectacle appeared around 10 p.m. Residents reported a line of stationary lights hovering above the city, forming what observers described as a carpenter's square. The Turnage family, Tim, Bobby, Hal, and grandson Damien, watched the approach with disbelief. The lights stretched across the heavens, one at the tip, two along each wing, all burning with an unwavering intensity. They could see the dark void behind the lights, a shadow that obscured stars, suggesting the presence of a solid form, though its edges remained indistinct. Damien whispered to his grandfather, "It's like it's alive," and Tim could only nod, rooted to the spot, eyes tracing the geometry, moving with precision. Ross Nichol, driving along Highway 89 at 8:10 p.m., saw the lights shift color as they passed overhead, first white, then a deep red. He estimated their altitude at roughly 1,000 feet. His mind raced through possibilities: commercial aircraft, helicopters, military drones, but none matched the slow, deliberate pace, the absolute silence, the perfectly spaced formation. He felt a chill as the lights glided directly above him, casting faint reflections on his windshield. His experience as an amateur astronomer offered no comfort. This did not resemble satellites. This did not resemble any celestial pattern he had ever catalogued. Amateur astronomer Mitch Stanley, observing from Scottsdale through a high-powered telescope, later reported that the three lead lights resolved into dual points beneath a dark geometric mass. Unlike ordinary lights in the sky, these retained their spacing and apparent size despite perspective shifts, suggesting not random points of illumination, but an actual, massive craft. Observers across 300 miles, from Nevada to Tucson, reported nearly identical geometry, movement, and silent motion. In the weeks that followed, government explanations emerged. The Air Force and Maryland Air National Guard stated that the lights over Phoenix were flares dropped during exercises at the Barry Goldwater Range, part of Operation Snowbird. But the official timeline of flare deployment, after 9 p.m., clashed with eyewitness accounts of earlier sightings. For many, the simplest explanations could not account for the first wave of sightings, the hovering formations, the perfect geometry, or the utter silence. Governor Fife Symington, initially dismissive, staged a press conference with an aide in an alien costume to quell media frenzy. 10 years later, however, he admitted seeing the lights himself. It was enormous, he told reporters, and its formation was precise, deliberate. No known aircraft could do that. His admission lent weight to the accounts of ordinary residents, pilots, and police officers who had long claimed that what they saw defied conventional explanation. Throughout the night, families, commuters, pilots, and astronomers became involuntary witnesses to an event that blurred the line between natural and anomalous. They documented it with cameras, camcorders, and detailed notes. The accounts were strikingly consistent: silent movement, precise formation, hovering motion, and disappearance without sound. The mass observation, spanning hundreds of miles, elevated the Phoenix lights from a local curiosity to one of the most significant UFO events of the late 20th century. As the night waned and the lights vanished behind ridges or over distant horizons, witnesses shared their stories over telephones, in coffee shops, and with neighbors. Skeptics questioned perception, atmospheric optics, and military exercises. Believers argued consistency, credibility, and mass observation. Each witness, whether casual observer or trained professional, had experienced the impossible firsthand, a shared phenomenon that challenged assumptions, exceeded expectations, and would remain unexplained. On that March night, the Arizona sky was no longer simply a backdrop. It became a canvas on which geometry, silence, and movement converged to create an enduring mystery. Those who saw it carried the memory of formation, color, and motion. Those who documented it preserved evidence for a future still debating what occurred. The Phoenix Lights were not a fleeting impression, but a collective encounter, silent, precise, and irrevocably etched into the memory of all who looked up. On the night of March 13, 1997, as the Phoenix Lights continued to etch themselves into the memories of thousands, official explanations began to emerge almost immediately, yet the event's mystery only deepened. By the following days, reports filtered through local media, creating a mosaic of observation, speculation, and skepticism. The U.S. Air Force and the Maryland Air National Guard issued statements attributing the lights to military flares dropped during exercises at the Barry Goldwater Range, part of Operation Snowbird. According to these reports, A-10 Thunderbolt II aircraft deployed illumination flares designed to descend slowly and provide temporary lighting on the desert floor for training exercises. Each flare burned for several minutes, drifting under the gentle pull of parachutes before finally extinguishing, leaving trails of smoke behind them. On paper, the explanation appeared simple, rational, and rooted in military necessity. Yet the first challenge to this explanation lay in timing. Multiple eyewitnesses from Prescott, Paulden, and Phoenix reported the most striking displays occurring well before the official flare drops. Some as early as 7:55 p.m., nearly an hour before the documented exercises began. Observers described the lights as moving in unison across the sky, maintaining precise formation, hovering in place, and disappearing without any trail or smoke. The visual characteristics of these lights, steady intensity, geometric arrangement, and a silence devoid of any mechanical hum, did not correspond neatly to parachute flares, which tend to sway, flicker, and emit subtle crackling noises as they descend. Trained observers, police officers, pilots, and astronomers added further complications to the narrative. In Paulden, a retired police officer carefully described 5 lights that moved in a straight line, spaced evenly, as if guided by invisible tracks in the sky. His observations were methodical, grounded in decades of experience identifying aircraft, meteorological phenomena, and atmospheric reflections. Likewise, commercial pilots returning from evening flights reported encountering the lights overhead. One pilot, with 29 years of flight experience, emphasized the unnatural slow speed, total silence, and perfectly controlled geometry. He compared the behavior to no known aerial craft in operation at the time. For individuals trained to parse altitude, formation, and navigation signals, the lights were a visual anomaly, structured, deliberate, and unaccounted for in any Air Force log accessible to the public. Even the governor of Arizona, Fife Symington, whose initial response had been to publicly ridicule the event, later admitted to personally witnessing the phenomenon. Symington described enormous silent lights with precise formation, an experience so compelling that he acknowledged the inadequacy of official explanations. The juxtaposition between the Air Force's claim and the reality observed by residents and officials like Symington created tension in the historical record, highlighting a dissonance between institutional narrative and public experience. Video footage captured by amateur videographers, though grainy and limited in resolution, offered some of the clearest evidence of the event. Michael Christen, recording from Phoenix, showed lines of stationary lights over the city. Through these recordings, researchers observed multiple lights maintaining consistent spacing and orientation, hovering over urban areas in defiance of any ordinary explanation. The recorded motion lacked the characteristic drift, flicker, and smoke trails that parachute-deployed flares would produce. For those reviewing the footage, the visual evidence amplified questions about the sufficiency of military accounts. Meteorological and atmospheric factors were also considered. Skeptics proposed explanations such as planet Venus visibility, distant aircraft, or temperature inversions. However, the sheer scale of the phenomenon, spanning roughly 300 miles, affecting hundreds of independent observers, and maintaining precise geometric formations, rendered such hypotheses insufficient. Venus, while bright in the sky, does not move in formation. Commercial aircraft emit noise and navigational lights inconsistent with the reported uniform glow of the Phoenix lights. Atmospheric refraction, while capable of optical illusions, could not account for synchronized movements across multiple distant locations simultaneously. Observers described a sense of incredulity as the lights glided across the desert. Families, commuters, and amateur astronomers alike recounted the same essential features: a line of lights forming geometric patterns, silent progression, hovering capability, and abrupt disappearance. For trained professionals, these details were significant. Pilots attempted to match the lights to known flight paths and altitude reports. Police officers considered the logistics of aircraft speed, illumination, and accessibility. Nothing matched. The gap between the Air Force's explanation and the observed characteristics of the lights remained unbridgeable. The tension between public testimony and institutional statement created a cultural narrative around the Phoenix Lights. Media coverage amplified the event, with newspapers, television broadcasts, and later documentaries chronicling eyewitness accounts alongside official statements. Arizona residents debated the plausibility of flares versus unexplained craft, and scientific commentators weighed in with atmospheric models and military data. Yet none could definitively reconcile the discrepancy between the documented flare drops and the pre-flare sightings, nor explain the precise silent motion of the objects described. Ultimately, the official attribution to military flares did not satisfy the witnesses who had observed the event in real time. The combination of early sightings, trained observers' testimonies, consistent video documentation, and the physical characteristics reported, hovering, geometric formation, silence, posed persistent questions. This divergence between the official explanation and public experience fostered enduring speculation and further investigation by civilian UFO researchers. Many scholars and enthusiasts now consider the Phoenix Lights an exemplary case of mass UFO sighting, a phenomenon where ordinary and professional observers converge on accounts that resist reduction to conventional phenomena. The Phoenix Lights thus occupy a unique position in the historical record. The event was observed across hundreds of miles, reported by thousands, and yet officially attributed to a mundane source whose characteristics did not align with the actual observations. The episode highlights the limits of institutional narrative when faced with real-time, large-scale human observation, and it underscores the enduring challenge of reconciling scientific explanation with first-hand experience. As the years pass, the lights continue to evoke debate, research, and reflection, emblematic of the unresolved tension between documented reality and official explanation, and a testament to the complexity of one of the most significant aerial phenomena in modern American history. By the time the Phoenix Lights had disappeared into the desert horizon, the event had already seeped into the public consciousness as a phenomenon that defied conventional explanation. Yet amid the flood of eyewitness reports, the most notable and complex perspective came from the state itself, Governor Fife Symington. In office at the time, Symington had been briefed on the incident almost immediately, as reports streamed into the governor's office, law enforcement agencies, and local media outlets. Initial accounts were fragmented. Phone calls from bewildered residents, video footage from amateur camcorders, and sporadic newspaper dispatches attempting to capture the scope of the sighting. The governor, recognizing both the sensational and political weight of the reports, chose initially to dismiss them, even going so far as to stage a light-hearted press event. One aide donned a crude alien costume to underscore the apparent absurdity of the claims. Cameras flashed, reporters laughed, and Symington attempted to diffuse what he perceived as hysteria, emphasizing rational explanations and the Air Force's pending report, attributing the lights to military flares. Yet the personal account of the governor would later complicate this narrative. In interviews conducted years after the event, Symington revealed that he had personally witnessed the lights that night. From his vantage point, the phenomenon was unlike anything in the records of aviation, meteorology, or military operations available to him. He described the lights as enormous, silent, and geometrically precise, moving in a pattern that implied deliberate control rather than random motion. It was dramatically large, he said, and otherworldly. No conventional aircraft could perform in that way. His recollection was meticulous: the formation's orientation, the relative spacing of the lights, the absence of sound, and the way the objects interacted with the surrounding sky all reinforced the perception of a tangible, massive presence. Symington's testimony introduced a critical tension into the historical understanding of the Phoenix Lights. On one hand, the Air Force's account offered a simple, rational explanation: flares deployed during training exercises. On the other, the testimony of a trained observer, someone with authority, credibility, and first-hand experience, challenged the completeness of that explanation. The lights that had been seen hours before the documented flare deployment, the hovering objects with perfect geometric alignment, and the silent progression across hundreds of miles of desert, suggested that some component of the event remained unexplained. For many researchers, the governor's account elevated the Phoenix Lights from a regional curiosity to a case of national significance. Other observers corroborated aspects of Symington's description. Pilots, police officers, and astronomers independently reported characteristics that flares alone could not replicate. For instance, the video captured by Michael Crisiston in Phoenix showed stationary lights hovering over urban areas, maintaining consistent separation and intensity without any noticeable drift. Amateur astronomer Mitch Stanley, observing from Scottsdale, reported resolving the lead lights into dual point sources beneath a dark mass, implying solid structure behind the illumination. The consistency of these accounts lent credibility to Symington's personal observation. The lights were not merely misperceived or misreported. They displayed behavior inconsistent with conventional aerial phenomena. The governor's initial public ridicule, followed by his later acknowledgement, also illustrated the broader societal tension surrounding the Phoenix Lights. Public authorities, pressured by media attention and citizen curiosity, must balance credibility with pragmatism. Symington's staged press conference, featuring an aide in alien costume, was intended to alleviate fear and skepticism, but it inadvertently fueled discourse. When a figure of his stature later admitted to witnessing the unexplained phenomenon, the act of acknowledgement lent weight to the many civilian accounts that had struggled to gain attention in the immediate aftermath. The governor's experience became a lens through which historians, ufologists, and journalists could examine the interplay between authority, public perception, and unexplained phenomena. Furthermore, Symington's reflections emphasized the psychological and emotional dimensions of witnessing the extraordinary. He spoke of a sense of awe, a recognition that the observed objects defied classification and invited speculation about their origin. The very act of observing something so clearly anomalous, he suggested, shifts one's perspective on conventional frameworks of understanding. For residents across Phoenix and the surrounding areas, similar experiences were reported: astonishment, disbelief, and a lingering awareness that the events of that evening could not be fully rationalized. These reactions underscore the human dimension of the Phoenix Lights, not merely as a technical or military anomaly, but as an event that engaged perception, belief, and communal memory. Over the following decade, the governor's testimony contributed to renewed public and scholarly interest in the event. Symington encouraged the release of official records and supported further investigation, emphasizing transparency and the importance of maintaining public trust. His advocacy highlighted a central paradox. While institutions can provide explanations, they may not account for the totality of human observation. For the Phoenix Lights, this paradox persists. The Air Force's documentation of flares coexists with widespread eyewitness reports of earlier, hovering, and geometrically precise lights. The interplay between these perspectives remains unresolved, yet the governor's admission ensures that the event is recorded not only in public memory, but also in the annals of political acknowledgement. Ultimately, the idea under fire in the context of the Phoenix Lights was not merely the identity of the lights themselves, but the broader challenge of reconciling official explanation with human observation. Symington's dual role, as initial skeptic and later witness, exemplifies the tension between authority and evidence, between public expectation and individual perception. The governor's account, grounded in precise observation and careful reflection, became a key piece of the narrative puzzle, offering insight into both the event itself and the socio-political context in which it unfolded. By the end of his reflections, Symington framed the Phoenix Lights not as mere spectacle, but as an enduring question. For him, and for the thousands of other witnesses, The objects observed that night represented more than lights in the sky. They were evidence that the world remains larger, stranger and more complex than immediate explanation allows. The story of the governor's experience, interwoven with civilian reports and video documentation, underscores the persistent tension between knowledge and mystery, leaving the Phoenix Lights as both a historical event and a continuing invitation to wonder. In the immediate aftermath of the Phoenix Lights, video recordings became among the most crucial artifacts of the event, offering a visual record that could supplement eyewitness testimony and convey the phenomenon to a broader audience. Among the earliest and most widely referenced recordings was that of Michael Krasiston, a Phoenix resident who, armed with a camcorder, captured a series of lights hovering above the city. Standing on a quiet street, Krasiston filmed for several minutes, the camera framing a series of evenly spaced points of light against the darkened urban skyline. Through the lens, the lights appeared static at first, then shifted slowly, maintaining perfect spacing as they moved with deliberate precision. For anyone watching the footage, the effect was immediate. These were not distant stars, nor flickering aircraft navigation lights, nor ordinary street or building reflections. They were something unusual, and their measured movement. The eerie steadiness of their glow and their silent presence lent credibility to the claims of countless eyewitnesses who had described the same phenomenon. Other amateur videographers, scattered across the metropolitan area, corroborated Krasiston's observations. Each recording, while limited by the technology of the time, grainy resolution, modest zoom capacity, and inconsistent frame rates, showed lights maintaining synchronous formation over Phoenix for extended periods. Some footage captured the lights lingering over neighborhoods, seemingly hovering over streets and rooftops. Others documented the objects gliding slowly across the horizon, maintaining the same geometric alignment, regardless of the observer's changing vantage point. This consistency across multiple independent recordings strengthened the argument that the lights were not merely atmospheric illusions or optical anomalies. Beyond the amateur recordings, professional pilots contributed critical observational data. A commercial airline pilot, returning home after an evening flight, reported encountering the formation while driving near Phoenix. Trained to read and interpret flight patterns, aircraft lighting, and altitude markers, the pilot recognized that the light's behavior did not conform to any aircraft he had flown or observed. He noted their unusually slow speed, the precise geometry, and the absence of any audible engine noise. To him, the lights were not celestial or terrestrial misidentifications. They were an airborne presence, entirely outside known parameters for conventional aircraft. He attempted to reconcile his experience with explanations such as distant helicopters, balloons, or flares, but none matched the measured movement or sustained formation. His testimony, combined with the video evidence, offered a rare convergence of civilian and professional observation that added significant weight to the credibility of the phenomenon. Astronomical observers added another layer of documentation. Mitch Stanley, an amateur astronomer in Scottsdale, used a telescope to examine the three lead lights in greater detail. Through the lens, Stanley claimed the lights resolved into twin-point sources beneath a dark mass, suggesting the presence of a structure behind the illumination. He noted that the spacing between the lights remained consistent, even as the apparent size shifted with distance and angle, a phenomenon inconsistent with drifting flares or distant aircraft. Stanley's observations were later corroborated by other amateur astronomers, who described hovering, structured lights maintaining exact geometric alignment for minutes at a time. The combination of telescope observations, ground-level video, and trained eyewitness accounts painted a compelling picture. The Phoenix Lights were not an isolated optical anomaly, but a large, coordinated display visible to thousands. Military explanations, while providing some context, failed to reconcile the full range of observational data. The Air Force claimed that A-10 aircraft had deployed illumination flares over the Barry-Goldwater Range, part of scheduled training operations. These flares burned for several minutes, descending slowly under parachutes and producing brief smoke trails. However, the most compelling sightings, those captured on video and reported by trained observers, occurred hours before the flare deployments began. The footage shows lights hovering in precise formation, moving deliberately across the skyline without flicker or drift. This discrepancy between the timeline of official operations and the observed behavior of the lights introduced significant doubt about whether flares alone could account for all aspects of the phenomenon. The media response amplified the impact of the recordings. News outlets, local newspapers, and later documentaries broadcast clips of the lights, often juxtaposing civilian footage with interviews of eyewitnesses. The visual evidence lent immediacy to otherwise abstract reports, allowing the public to witness in real time a phenomenon that defied conventional explanation. For many viewers, the combination of shaky, amateur footage and calm, detailed narration from observers created an uncanny sense of authenticity. These were real people documenting real events, reacting in real time to something extraordinary. The recordings also provided a reference point for investigators, both civilian and academic. Analysts could study the spacing, relative movement, and apparent altitude of the lights, comparing observations from multiple vantage points. This analysis reinforced several consistent findings. The lights maintained perfect geometric patterns, moved silently, and appeared to occupy substantial airspace. Radar records, though inconclusive, and subsequent investigation could not fully account for these features. In the absence of definitive military or scientific data, the videos and corroborating eyewitness testimony became the primary evidence base for ongoing research. Ultimately, the video recordings from March 13, 1997, played a pivotal role in preserving the phenomenon of the Phoenix Lights for posterity. They allowed ordinary observers to convey their experiences with clarity, provided trained professionals with material to analyze, and forced institutions to engage with a visual record that challenged standard explanations. The documentation captured both the awe of the witnesses and the inexplicable nature of the lights themselves, ensuring that the event remained accessible, verifiable, and subject to continued scrutiny. Through these recordings, the Phoenix Lights transcended anecdote and rumor. They became tangible evidence of a widely observed phenomenon, compelling in its consistency, haunting in its silence, and enduring in its mystery. For historians, ufologists, and casual observers alike, the videos remain a testament to the experience of that night, a clear, recorded trace of a mass sighting that defies conventional interpretation, immortalized in the eyes of those who looked up and could not look away. Decades after the night of March 13, 1997, the Phoenix Lights continue to resonate in American culture, occupying a unique space where collective memory, eyewitness testimony, and unresolved mystery intersect. The event, witnessed by thousands across a span of roughly 300 miles, has become one of the most widely reported and debated mass UFO sightings in modern history. Its legacy is multifaceted, encompassing public fascination, scientific inquiry, cultural reflection, and ongoing debate about the nature of unexplained aerial phenomena. For residents of Arizona, the Phoenix Lights were not simply a momentary spectacle. They were an event that reshaped perception of the night sky and challenged assumptions about the known limits of aviation and technology. Families, commuters, pilots, and astronomers who saw the lights reported experiences that remain vivid decades later. Many described a sense of awe and disbelief, a confrontation with something that appeared both enormous and controlled, yet silent and seemingly alien in its precision. Eyewitnesses consistently emphasized the scale, geometry, and deliberate movement of the lights, and in doing so created a coherent narrative of observation that transcended the boundaries of individual experience. Unlike isolated UFO reports, which are often dismissed or marginalized, the Phoenix Lights involved coordinated mass observation, producing a dataset of human testimony both extensive and detailed. The widespread documentation of the event, through video recordings, photographs, and meticulous personal accounts, ensured that the phenomenon could not be easily ignored. Amateur videographers like Michael Crisiston captured the hovering lights above Phoenix, providing tangible visual evidence that could be analyzed and replayed. Amateur astronomers, such as Mitch Stanley, observed the lights through telescopes, noting details that suggested solid structure behind the illumination. Trained observers, including police officers and commercial pilots, confirmed characteristics of the phenomenon that contradicted conventional explanations, such as flares or atmospheric anomalies. The convergence of these observations across multiple independent witnesses created a robust evidentiary foundation, ensuring the Phoenix Lights' place in both UFO history and public discourse. At the institutional level, the Phoenix Lights forced government and military agencies to respond, highlighting the tension between public observation and official explanation. The Air Force and Maryland Air National Guard attributed part of the sightings to flares dropped during training exercises, but the timeline of these operations failed to account for the earliest reports. Governor Fife Symington, initially dismissive and even playful in his response, later admitted to personally witnessing the phenomenon and described it as otherworldly and unlike any aircraft known to him. This acknowledgement by a high-ranking official lent additional credibility to civilian accounts and emphasized the enduring mystery of the event. The Phoenix Lights also fostered a rich cultural legacy. They have been referenced in documentaries, books, and scholarly articles, and remain a focal point in discussions of mass UFO sightings. Researchers and enthusiasts often cite the event as a paradigmatic example of the complexities inherent in investigating aerial anomalies. The combination of extensive eyewitness testimony, video documentation, and public discourse makes the Phoenix Lights a rare case study, where mass observation and media attention intersect with unresolved questions of technology, perception, and the limits of official explanation. From a sociological perspective, the Phoenix Lights illustrate the dynamics of collective experience. Thousands of people independently observed the same phenomenon, yet each individual encounter contributed to a larger, composite understanding of the event. The consistency of reports regarding formation, scale, silence, and movement underscores the reliability of mass observation and challenges the notion that UFO sightings are purely subjective or anecdotal. In this sense, the Phoenix Lights stand as an early example of a phenomenon that defies reduction to personal misperception, offering instead a model for studying shared, large-scale human observation of anomalous events. The lights also catalyzed ongoing public interest in the broader study of UFOs, or UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena, as officially designated in contemporary parlance. The Phoenix Lights have been invoked in discussions of military disclosure, civilian research initiatives, and national security considerations. Their enduring presence in public consciousness has influenced policy debates and inspired continued examination of aerial phenomena that remain unexplained despite technological advancement. Importantly, the legacy of the Phoenix Lights is not confined to empirical or institutional domains. The event has left a psychological imprint, shaping how observers and society at large perceive the possibility of unexplained phenomena. Witnesses often recount an enduring sense of wonder, the memory of looking skyward and seeing something that seemed impossibly large, controlled, and silent. This combination of visual magnitude and inexplicability fosters a persistent curiosity, compelling both casual observers and researchers to seek further understanding. In the decades since the event, the Phoenix Lights have become emblematic of the tension between known and unknown, science and speculation, personal experience and official narrative. They highlight the limitations of conventional explanation in the face of coordinated, large-scale observation. Videos, photographs, and eyewitness accounts preserve the phenomenon in a form that continues to invite investigation, debate, and reflection. Unlike fleeting anomalies or isolated incidents, the Phoenix Lights endure because of the scope of observation, the clarity of documentation, and the profound effect on those who witnessed them. Ultimately, the Phoenix Lights remain a puzzle that resists full resolution. They embody the intersection of collective human experience, credible documentation, and the enduring question of what exists beyond the reach of conventional understanding. Their legacy is a testament to both the capacity of ordinary observers to recognize extraordinary events and the persistence of mystery in the modern world. Decades later, the Phoenix Lights continue to challenge assumptions, inspire curiosity, and affirm that even in an age of advanced technology, the skies may hold phenomena that remain beyond immediate explanation. As night fell over Arizona on March 13, 1997, The Phoenix lights vanished into the horizon, leaving behind more questions than answers. Thousands had seen the same phenomenon, yet no conventional explanation could fully account for their size, formation, or silence. Pilots, police officers, families, and even the governor were witnesses to something that defied expectation and challenged understanding. Videos, photographs, and detailed testimonies preserve the memory, yet the lights remain elusive, a silent reminder that the skies above may hold mysteries still beyond our reach. The Phoenix lights endure, not as a story told but as an experience lived, a collective encounter with the unexplained, leaving every witness and observer to wonder what truly moves above us in the dark.